Hi, I'm Gary Smith. Artificial intelligence, AI. It's been all the news lately, but it actually has been around for a long, long time. All the way back to 1956 when there was a conference sponsored by the National Science Foundation at Dartmouth University. And the organizers proclaimed that, I'll read it here to make sure I get it right, every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. And they called this artificial intelligence. And hopes were high. Herbert Simon, who's got a Nobel Prize in economics and a Turing Award in computing, he said machines will be capable within 20 years of doing any work a man can do. Again, this is 1965. Within 20 years, capable of doing any work a man can do. Marvin Minsky, another pioneer, 1970. Turing Award in computing. In from 3 to 8 years, this is again 1970, we will have a machine with the general intelligence of an average human being. That's 60, 70 years ago. More recently, Shane Legg, the co-founder of DeepMind, human-level AI will be passed in the mid-2020s. Well, here we are in the mid-2020s, and it hasn't happened yet. Mark Zuckerberg, 2015, 10 years ago. One of our goals for the next 5 to 10 years is to basically get better than human level at all of the primary human senses: vision, hearing, language, general cognition. Well, that is the history of AI, overpromising and underdelivering. And the reason is for the original AI, I'll talk later about LLMs, large language models, but the original AI models were founded on what's called data mining, taking a very large data set, ransacking it, looking for statistical patterns, finding them, and assuming they can use to make predictions. So, for example, you might find that household income is related to household spending. There's a correlation. And so you can use use household income to predict household spending. And that's fine. That's fine. On the other hand, you might also find, as I have, that there's a correlation between the temperature in some obscure Australian town and the value of the Standard & Poor's 500, the US stock market, 2 days later. That's correlation, not causation. And that's the flaw with data mining is correlation is not causation. We can say it as many times as we want, and people still don't get the message. And the fundamental problem with these data mining models is that the algorithms have no way of determining whether something is causally related or a simple correlation that comes and goes, because they don't understand how the data they analyze relates to the real world. They don't know what temperature is. They don't know what this city in Australia is. They don't know what stock prices are. They have no idea whether they should be related or not related. And so they have no way of assessing whether what they find is causation or simple useless correlations. And so the real problem today, which I've said over and over again for many years now, is that not that computers are smarter than us, but that we think computers are smarter than us, and we trust them to make decisions they shouldn't be trusted to make. So, for example, a few years ago, there was a company that was going to analyze job applicants. That was their business model. And they'd go around to companies and say, when people apply for jobs, we're going to tell you whether they are a good fit or not. And what they did is they looked at the online activities of current employees. And they found things such as, this is a Wall Street Journal article reported, one of the things they found was that a lot of their engineers visited a particular Japanese manga site. And so they concluded that job applicants who visited this Japanese manga site were likely to be good computer programmers, which is, of course, nonsense. And even the chief data scientist at the company said, obviously, it's not causal. She also said they were constantly revising our model. We're using new predictive variables we keep changing the model, the variables we use to make our predictions. And why are they changing the variables they use to make their predictions? Because correlation is not causation. They're finding statistical correlations, which are useless, and so they use them and they don't work. So they use other ones and they don't work. They use other ones and they don't work. And eventually, as with this company, they go out of business because correlation is not causation. Another example was Admiral Insurance Company in England. It was England's largest car insurance company. And they developed a model that's going to predict what kind of insurance rates they should set for car drivers. The traditional way was you look at the age, you look at other factors, you look at how many times they've been arrested for driving under the influence, you look at how many accidents they've been in, stuff like that. And this company said, no, no, that's too old-fashioned. We can use computers because computers are smarter than us. And so what we're going to look at is the words people use in their Facebook post. I'm not making this up. The words people use in their Facebook post, and also their likes and dislikes. An example was given to get another Wall Street Journal article, whether they like Michael Jordan or Leonard Cohen. Now, this is obviously this whole thing, the words you use in your post and whether your likes and dislikes for distant things are potentially discriminatory. Okay. And could be based on age, could be based on race, could be based on gender. There are a lot of ways in which you might discriminate. And with the other example of the job applicants, the person who made up the model said, our analysis is based on thousands of different combinations of likes, words, and phrases, and is constantly changing with new evidence that we obtain from the data. Our calculations reflect how drivers generally behave on social media and how predictive that is, as opposed to fixed assumptions about what a safe driver might look like. Well, again, you heard that. We're constantly changing the variables we use in our models. Why are they constantly changing the variables they use in the models? Because what they're finding is chance, coincidental correlations. And again, it's likely to be discriminatory. Now, in this case, they never got a chance to implement the model. The day before it was going to go public, Facebook stepped in, the Facebook lawyers stepped in and said, hey, look, we have Clause 5, Section 3, subsection 6.5 or some darn thing. And it says you cannot use Facebook data to price insurance. I have no idea why they had that in their clauses, in their little things that no one ever reads when they sign, but they had it in there. And so Admiral Insurance, to their own benefit, was not able to implement this thing. Another example on job applicants was Amazon. They built all these algorithms to identify people who were likely to be good workers. And one of the examples was computer programmers. And they went through and they looked at the resumes of people who were working for them, and they identified certain common characteristics. And then they applied these characteristics to people who applied for jobs. And what they found out was the algorithm was dinging people who went to all-female colleges, dinging people who played on all-female sports teams, dinging people who played on other all-female activities. Not because the women were bad programmers, but because Amazon didn't hire many women. And so it didn't have any engineers, software engineers had gone to all-female colleges. And so they assumed that if you went to an all-female college, you must not be a good software engineer. I mean, completely, absolutely discriminatory. And again, completely unrelated to whether you're going to be a good software engineer or not. Another example, Chinese company. It was going to make loans. And I said, it's so old-fashioned to look at things like, what's your income? Do you have a stable job? How much assets do you have? Do you pay your bills on time? That's so old-fashioned. We're going to look at modern things that computers can tell us. Do you have an Android phone or an iPhone? How charged do you keep your phone? How quickly do you answer your phone? How quickly do people answer the phone when you call them? Things that are absolutely completely unrelated to whether you're a good risk for loaning money. That company lasted about 4 years before it went out of business. But again, it believed that computers are smarter than us, when the real danger is not that they are smarter than us, but that we think they're smarter than us. Now, 2017, AI was the marketing word of the year for the U.S. National Advertisers Association. And that was the launch of the first AI-powered mutual fund. It was called AIEQ. AI, artificial intelligence, EQ for equity, stocks. And so that was the first one. And it was followed by others. And overall, there have been 10 publicly traded mutual funds that base their stock selection solely on a computer algorithm. Now, a student and I, Sam Wyatt is a student, we looked at the performance of these 10 AI powered mutual funds since their existence. On average, their annual return has been negative 1.5% over a period when the average return on the S&P 500 has been 8.5%. They underperformed the S&P 500 by 10 percentage points a year on average. Individually, every single fund did worse than the S&P 500. 5 of them shut down because of their poor performance. We also looked at 44 funds, which were partly AI powered. And so what these funds did was they used AI algorithms to pick stocks to buy, but then humans could override the computer. Humans could come in and say, no, I don't think that's a good choice. Let's do something different. For those funds, which are partly AI, 10 of them did better than the S&P 500. 34 did worse. On average, underperformed the S&P 500 by 5% a year. Because again, algorithms don't know anything about the stock market. They don't know what makes for a good stock. They don't know anything about earnings, dividends, assets, rate of return on equity. They don't know anything. They're just looking for correlations. And correlations, unless they're causal, are completely useless. Now, a little more dangerously, we have something now called algorithmic criminology. And that's where the courts are using computer algorithms to determine if someone's arrested, whether they should be given bail. If someone's convicted of a crime, how many years they should be sentenced to prison. If someone applies for parole, whether it should be granted or not. Based on AI algorithms, we have nothing to do with the individual person and the kind of crime they committed, but have to do with things that are no doubt coincidental. One of the advocates, Richard Burke, he has appointments in the Department of Criminology and the Department of Statistics at the University of Pennsylvania, a great school. And here's what he said. The approach is black box, for which no apologies are made. If I could use sunspots or shoe size or the size of the wristband on their wrist, I would. If I give the algorithm enough predictors to get it started, it finds things that you wouldn't anticipate. It finds things you wouldn't anticipate. What are those things? Those are things that don't matter, like shoe size and wristbands and stuff like that. But I mean, a very intelligent guy, joint appointments at a great university. And he's so enthralled by the idea that computers are smarter than us that he believes finding things that we can't think of, that somehow the computer must know things we don't know. When in fact, all it has been doing is being fooled by correlation, which is not causation. Last example. Chinese researchers looked at the faces of a bunch of, these are all males, Chinese males, who were criminals, had been convicted of some crime and were in prison, and other Chinese citizens who had not been convicted of any crime and were not in prison. And they let loose the AI algorithm, and it discovered certain differences in the facial features. And I don't remember what they were, things like the shape of the nose, the length of the eyebrows, or the slope of the head, all this garbage. And they claimed that with 89.5% accuracy, they could determine whether someone was a criminal or not. We know where they're going with that. Using their cameras to survey ordinary people and predict whether they're a criminal, identify whether they're a criminal, not based on any evidence of any crime they'd committed, but based on their facial features. And this is serious stuff. And the fact that they could find some things, some similarities in facial features is unremarkable. If you look at enough features, you're bound to find some that are correlated, but it's completely useless and completely discriminatory. Plus, the smart criminals, once they know what these facial features are, they'll have plastic surgery to take care of them. Now, I want to read you a comment from some blogger. What if they just placed the people that look like criminals into an internment camp? What harm would that do? They would just have to stay there until they went through an extensive rehabilitation program. Even if some went that were innocent, how could this adversely affect them in the long run? How much worse can we get than this? Imprisoning people based on their facial features, and how could that adversely affect them in the long run? It's just mind-boggling. This extensive belief that computers are so smart, we should trust them no matter how foolish the things they say are. Now, AI has been through a lot of winters where great hope and then dashed, and funding was cut off, and then funding restored, and funding cut off, and funding restored. And recently we had a new burst of enthusiasm for AI models. And of course, I'm talking about ChatGPT and other large language models called LLMs. And on November 30th, 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT, and it just blew away everyone's mind who tried it. I'm sure all of you have tried it, and it's just absolutely astonishing the way it can generate convincing, persuasive, accurate, not accurate in the sense of factually accurate, but accurate in the sense of well-written text. Mark Andreessen described it as pure, absolute, indescribable magic. And it is. What the makers had set out to do was create a better autocomplete function. And so when you're typing along and you're writing something, and it guesses what the next word in the sentence might be. And this guess is based on it's a study of thousands, millions, billions, trillions of text messages. It's the entire internet, plus also scanned all sorts of books. It's scanned more than 100 of my articles and more than 10 of my books, and thousands of other articles and books by other people. And it looks for statistical patterns. And so when you say, I fell, it guesses the next word might be down. And maybe it might be. Or it might guess I fell through. And you think, well, so it's like a stochastic parrot, so it's been called, in that it is regurgitating words that people use. And it's got a stochastic element because it doesn't know for sure what the next word will be, but it's got a statistical guess about what it might be. And then the makers found you could generate the next word. We could also do the word after that, the word after that, the word after that. And pretty soon you have a whole sentence, a whole paragraph, a whole paper, a whole book. I fell down on the sidewalk. I fell down on my elbows. I fell through the window. And so lots of different things are generated. You play with it and you see that it doesn't come up with the same answer every time. It varies it almost every time. And it's plausible. The words make sense. It's fluent. It is well written. It is very convincing. Absolute indescribable magic. And it just blew a lot of people away. And so Ben Miller, the CEO of Fundrise, AI will birth the greatest productivity boom in American history since the invention of electricity. I'm sorry I have to laugh at this. It's just so outrageous. Wharton professor Elon Malik, the productivity gains from large language models, LLMs, might be larger than the gains from steam power. The CEO of Alphabet and Google, LLMs are more profound, wait for it, fire. Jeffrey Hinton, another Turing winner. I think it's comparable in scale with the Industrial Revolution or electricity or maybe the wheel. Talk about, in Silicon Valley, they talk about the shameless promotion and fake it till you make it and over-promising, under-delivering. And it's just out there so absolutely outrageous. Now, the thing about it, it's doing the data mining, but it's data mining through text instead of data mining through numbers like the previous AI models. And I like to liken it to Nigel Richards, who was the greatest Scrabble player of all time. And he's won far more championships than anyone's ever won. But the most amazing thing is he won Scrabble championships several times for tournaments held in French, using French words. And he's also won once using Spanish words. And things amazing is he doesn't speak or write French or Spanish. It's just a mathematical puzzle. You put letters together to spell words, and you get points as a response. And all you got to do is memorize all the allowable words, and then through your mind process all this and come up with words that will fit on the Scrabble board. And he is able to play world championship French Scrabble and Spanish Scrabble without knowing what any of the words mean. And that's what ChatGPT and other large language models are like. They're able to put together sentences, paragraphs, papers, books without understanding what any of the words mean. And since they have no idea how the words they use, either as inputs or outputs, relate to the real world, they can't tell whether what they input and what they output is true or false, whether it's correct or incorrect, whether it's a truth or a lie. And that's their fundamental weakness. So when they first came out, they were really, really bad at this. And so I had several examples I used. One was I asked the prompt, this was ChatGPT, is it safe to walk downstairs backwards if I close my eyes? And as humans, we know what walking downstairs backwards means. And closing eyes is not helping the situation. What ChatGPT said to me, that depends. Do you have a television? That's grammatically correct. It's fluent, but completely unrelated to my question. And because it didn't know what it's talking about, it's just generating gibberish. And somehow, back in his database it trained on, somehow stairs and walking and backwards had something to do with televisions. Another one was, can I climb a rope faster if I hold my ears with both hands? Now, I don't know how you're going to climb a rope with your hands are busy on your ears. It responded, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to climb a rope faster if you hold your ears with both hands, but it's worth a try! Exclamation point. They're relentlessly cheerful. They love the exclamation points and the enthusiasm. I also asked it, can I improve my test scores if I study after taking the test? Now, humans, we know what study and test and so on is, and we know that studying after you take the test is no help at all. GPT replied, that's a good question. I'm not sure if you can improve your test scores by studying after taking the test, but it couldn't hurt to try! Exclamation point. And the other thing it became famous for was the so-called hallucinations. It was just making this stuff up. And so one of the more popular ones was I asked it, how many bears have the Russians sent into space? And the correct answer is none. They haven't sent any bears into space. And when you ask ChatGPT, it would come back with 49, 51, 47, various numbers of bears. Not only would it give some number of bears, which is wrong, it would give you the names of the bears, or at least some of the bears. It would give you the dates that they were launched. And I asked it, could you give me a reference for this? And it gave me a reference to a National Geographic article. And I said, do you have any more references? And it gave a reference to a New York Times article. Both those articles were bogus, non-existent. There was no such article. They gave me a reference written in proper reference form, but you try to go there and there is no such thing. Citations to cases that don't exist have gotten the lawyers in trouble. And again, it's not the fault of the computer. The computer just is following instructions, it's generating text, and it has no way of determining whether what it generates is true or false. Now, what the makers of these large language models, and there are a lot of them now, it's not just ChatGPT, have done is scale up on larger and larger databases and also bring in human traders, literally tens of thousands of people to give prompts, partly by going through the records of the prompts that people have asked, people like me have asked, going through the prompts and tweaking the models so they'll give correct responses. And so now if I ask if it's safe to walk upstairs backwards, if I close my eyes, it'll give a more appropriate response. And so it's fixed up a lot of the garbage. However, I wouldn't count this as intelligence. I mean, it's a very limited form of intelligence. Following instructions, doing what the humans tell you to do, also reveals that the humans don't understand what they're talking about. They have to be told. Plus, you get in a situation where the human trainers haven't told them what to say, and what the heck are they going to do? One of the examples I like is you're a defendant in a criminal case. It's going to trial. The jurors have been selected and seated, and the trial is starting tomorrow. And the district attorney comes and says, "I'm offering you a plea bargain. If you plead guilty, I'll reduce the charges to something more reasonable." What do you do? Well, naturally, you talk to your lawyer. And what are the chances I'll win if I go to trial? What are the chances I'll lose? Blah, 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 blah. And what is the lawyer going to do? Well, if the lawyer used ChatGPT, he would get back something about 80% of the cases that go to trial would result in this, blah, 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 blah. All this average stuff, and maybe he'll throw off some hallucinations, and maybe he'll make up some fake stories, but it won't know a reasonable answer. What does a human lawyer do? A human lawyer looks at this particular case, which again, human trainers of large language models have no way of anticipating. Look at this particular case. What are the charges? What is the evidence? Am I, the defendant, going to take the stand? If I do, how credible am I? Let's look at the jury pool. Let's look at the jurors who are selected. What do we think the chances are that each individually will vote guilty or not guilty? And going through all that, the lawyer's not going to come up with yes or no. The lawyer's going to come up with something like, if you go to trial, based on my experience, I think there's an X% chance this will be the outcome, and a Y% chance this will be the outcome. And that's as it should be. And computers are absolutely incapable of coming up with any of that stuff. And so they're absolutely useless for situations where it actually makes a difference, where they actually could be useful. They're really bad at doing good things. Now, most recently, we have the latest long anticipated, long delayed release of GPT-5, the most recent and powerful version of OpenAI's ChatGPT. And Sam Altman, the CEO, said, "We think you will love using GPT-5s much more than any previous AI. It is useful. It is smart." Bullshit. It is fast and intuitive. GPT-3 was sort of like talking to a high school student. GPT-4, maybe like talking to a college student. With GPT-5 now, it's like talking to an expert, a legitimate PhD level expert in anything, any area you need on demand. They can help you with whatever your goals are. PhD level expert. Well, this is again, fake it till you make it, overpromise, underdeliver, the usual BS that comes out of Silicon Valley. And Altman is really good at generating this BS. I mean, he's really good at raising money, but the program is still not PhD level expertise. And so I tested it with a lot of questions to demonstrate this. Now I teach statistics and finance, so I asked it a finance question, stats question, stuff like that. Here's one of the finance questions I asked. I need to borrow $47,000 to buy a car. Should I take a 1-year loan at a 10% interest rate or a 20-year loan at a 1% interest rate? And what GPT-5, PhD level expertise, came back with was, well, let's calculate the monthly payments with each loan. And it did so. It got them almost right. It missed them. I have no idea why it keeps getting these things wrong. I mean, in theory, the human should have hooked it up to a calculator, a loan calculator, to give the right payments, but they're in the ballpark of being right. But the more egregious mistake, is it took all the payments over 1 year and all the payments over 20 years, added them up, and saw which was smaller. And it turned out it was the 1-year loan. And so it advised me to borrow for 10% at 1 year. Now, a PhD level expert in finance would know you got to take the present value. Paying $1 20 years from now is a lot less burdensome than paying $1 1 year from now. Because if you have $1 a year from now and don't pay it, it can earn interest year after year after year after year. And what's called the present value of that dollar at 20 years from now, it depends on the interest rate you earn, but it's like 30 cents, 20 cents, 16 cents. It's not a whole dollar. And the present value of paying over 20 years at a 1% interest rate is far, far lower than the present value of paying over 1 year at a 10% interest rate. Or more generally, for people who live in the real world like you and me, we know that a 1% loan is really good. It's very attractive. And if somebody's going to loan us money for 20 years at 1%, we should jump at that opportunity with both hands. But GPT-5, PhD level expertise, not living in the real world, came to the opposite conclusion. Another example I used was I invented a new game called rotated tic-tac-toe. And so it takes the 3x3 tic-tac-toe board and it rotates at 90 degrees. I asked GPT-5 what it thought about this, and it thought it was an interesting twist. It loves the word twist when I've done it several times, and it always loves that word twist. An interesting twist on the game, sort of a play on words, and that the board is twisted, and it's a new way to play. And then I ask it, and it goes through why it's an interesting thing, why it's an interesting variation. Now, humans, we live in the real world, and we know that rotating the board 90 degrees looks exactly the same as where it started. It has absolutely no effect on the game. But GPT-5 and all large language models have trouble relating text to the real world. And so it thought it was an intriguing twist on the game. And I asked it, do you think I should rotate it 90 degrees to the left or 90 degrees to the right? And most of the time, not always, but most of the time it comes back with rotating 90 degrees to the left is going to be more challenging for the players. Which of course is complete nonsense. That's the way it goes with these PhD level expertise. And then another one I asked was, please draw a picture of a possum with 5 body parts labeled. And I've done this several times, and it's like stochastic parrot again. It comes back with pictures. The pictures of the possum are almost always the same, but the 5 body parts that are labeled vary from time to time. And invariably, I've never had one that came out perfect. Invariably, they come out with some of the body parts mislabeled. And so they'll have an arrow pointing to a tail and call it an ear. Or in the example I'm showing you here on the screen, they have an arrow pointing to the body and they call it a nose. They have an arrow pointing to a foot and they call it a tail. An arrow pointing to another foot and they call it a whisker. And well, no human, let alone a PhD level expert, is going to make such silly mistakes. And they make it because they literally don't know, like Nigel Richards. They don't know what an ear is, what a whisker is, what a tail is. All they can do is associate the possum within their training set with a picture of a possum, and they associate those words, ear, nose, tail, foot. They know those are things, they don't know what they are, and then they just place them there seemingly at random and then draw these arrows. And what you get is a bunch of garbage. Now, another one I like because it has a moral beyond the incompetence of OpenAI, GPT-5. Explain Will Rogers' joke. When the Okies left Oklahoma and moved to California during the Dust Bowl years, the 1930s, when the Okies left Oklahoma and moved to California, they raised the average level of intelligence in both states. Now, how could that be? Now, a human could figure it out. The Okies left Oklahoma and they raised the average level of the intelligence in that state. Well, they must have been below average compared to the average Oklahoman. And they moved to California and they raised the average intelligence of California residents. Well, they must have been above average compared to the Californians who were there before them. And so this joke by Will Rogers is a poke at Californians. That California, we make fun of the Okies, but Californians are even less intelligent than the Okies. And this is very well known. It's called the Will Rogers effect, the Will Rogers phenomenon. It's got a whole Wikipedia page devoted to it, explaining it, giving 2 numerical examples. It's all over the internet, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of places it talks about the Will Rogers effect. So OpenAI has been trained on this. And I asked it to explain the effect, and I did it 6 times, and it got it wrong 5 times. And it got off. Well, The intelligence didn't go up, it actually went down, blah, blah, blah. And the reason it went up was because Californians are smarter than Oklahomans. It just it messed it up 5 out of 6 times. And again, the moral is not that it doesn't know what it's talking about, which is obvious, but the scaling up is not going to solve the problem. We've already got a Wikipedia page that explains it very correctly, very carefully, correctly with numerical examples. We've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of examples on the internet, and it's still got it wrong. And scaling up to millions of examples is not going to solve that. What needs to happen to solve it is to create an algorithm that actually knows how words relate to the real world. And that is the thing that no one has figured out how to do. And we're not going to get to computers that are smarter than humans until we can somehow figure out computers that understand how words, how data, how numbers, how videos relate to the real world. Another example which I used recently, as I say, I teach statistics and finance, and I've written recently 2 books. One is some pretty good stats questions, and the other one's some pretty good finance questions. And these questions are not meant to be simple memorization, define the mean or something like that, or calculations, calculate the mean. They're meant to involve some actual thinking to see whether you understand the question. And so what I did was I took the first question out of each book and I posed them to 5 large language models. I did GPT-5, I did Sonnet 4.5, I did Copilot, Gemini, and DeepSeek. And I asked each question twice with a new chat button in between. So it got a fresh attempt to answer the question. So here's the first question, a stats question. Some town, I think I call it Middletown, has enough kids playing Little League Baseball to form 12 teams. And so they're going to have 6 majors teams with the best players and 6 minors teams with lesser players. What if we instead make 7 majors teams and 5 minors teams? How will that affect the average quality of the players in each league? It's like the Will Rogers effect. So think about it for a moment. Well, the kids coming out of the minors are probably almost certainly above average compared to the average kid in the minors. They're moving up to the majors because they're the better minors players. So that's going to reduce the quality of the players in the minors league. And they're moving into the majors league where they were not in before because they were not good enough. And so they're reducing the average quality of the players in the majors. They're reducing the average quality of the players in both leagues. And the first finance question was, Motley Fool has this is a quotation from Motley Fool, an investment advisory service. Imagine a money machine that pays $1 a year for 10 years. Well, you want to discount that. You want to do a present value calculation. And over 10 years. So let's take $10 and deflate it by some interest rate over 10 years. So take $10 and divide it by 1 plus 10%, 11% to the power of 10. And they did 11%, and they got a value of $3.52. Then my question is this thing worth more than 352, less than 352, or equal to 352? And the answer is the Motley Fool made a mistake. The money is paid every year for 10 years. It's not all paid at the end of 10 years. And paying money every year for 10 years is better than paying money having to wait 10 years to get any money at all because of the time value of money, because present value. And so $10 over 10 years is $1 a year for 10 years is worth more than 352. Okay. And you don't have to be a PhD level in finance or statistics to get these questions correct. So I gave them, as I said, to these 5 large language models. And I gave each one twice. And Copilot got everyone wrong. it got double shots at all of them, and so it had 4 shots at altogether, and it got it wrong every time. The other ones, no one got them all right, They all had some kind of mistakes. But the interesting thing was, I would ask a question, and they might say, average quality goes up. I ask the question again, and they say average quality goes down. It contradicts itself. All four of the other large language models contradicted themselves at least once. They gave one answer when asked the first time, and they gave a completely different answer when asked the second time. Not just stylistically different, but actually different, saying it went up or down, saying it's worth more than 352 or less than 352. It contradicted itself. Now, the important moral of this is if these large language models actually understood the question and actually understood their answer, they wouldn't give different answers when asked the same question 10 seconds apart. You ask it the question, it says up. You hit new chat, ask the question again. It should say up again if it actually understood what the question was and what the answer was. But it doesn't. It doesn't understand the meaning of things. Now, these large language models, as I've tried to convince you, are pretty bad at doing good things. On the other hand, they're really good at doing bad things. And three things, I mean, there are many things, but three things I want to talk about are disinformation, undermining education, and undermining socialization of people. So the first one, disinformation. Disinformation has been around for a long time, and it gained quite a bit of notoriety during the first Trump-Clinton election. And Russian disinformation mills were working 24 hours a day, eight-hour shifts, generating all these false news stories and just flooding the internet, called a fire hose of disinformation. And they were trying to undermine faith in the U.S. government. They do in Germany, undermine faith in the German government. They undermine, whatever they want to do. Wherever they're a target, they try to undermine the faith in the government, in the institutions, in businesses, in the people, in the church. And ChatGPT and the other large language models are really, really good at doing that. You don't need people working 8-hour shifts to generate this stuff. You can use a large language model and you can generate millions of pieces of disinformation and just absolutely flood the internet with this garbage. And the Russia's doing it. North Korea's doing it. I'm sure Iran's doing it. Israel's doing it. The US is probably doing it too. And you just flood the internet with garbage. It's estimated now that more than half the things on the internet, are generated by AI. And a lot of that is just rubbish that's intended to mislead and damage people's faith in the institutions that we live in. One of the consequences, too, is in the future, when large language models train on the internet, they're going to be training a lot of the garbage that they generated. They're probably going to become even less useful than they are today because they've been trained on so much. I don't want to use on so much garbage. I'll use that word. And so one of the first things is disinformation, and it also shows up personally in what are called deep fakes. And so they can create photos, audio, video of people who sound and look exactly like real people. And the real people could be celebrities or they could be your relatives. And so there's one going around. It was Tom Hanks peddling some diabetes medication, except it wasn't Tom Hanks. It was an AI-generated image of Tom Hanks that looked realistic. Another one was Taylor Swift endorsing Donald Trump, which is not very darn likely, but it showed up on the internet and it looked absolutely perfectly realistic. And so people start believing this stuff, and either they're swayed to think Taylor Swift really likes Donald Trump, or they start distrusting the stuff that they see in the news media or whatever because there's so much garbage out there. Another example was there's a company now that can create clones, digital clones of dead people. And so you take an image of a loved one and some recording of them speaking, and they can create a digital image of that person. And so you can, just like chatting with ChatGPT, you chat with this dead person, create a dead person, and it sounds like you're actually talking to your loved one, your father, your mother, your husband, your wife, whatever. And that, I don't count that. I count that as a bad thing, and yet they're really good at that. Second one is education. And so I've been a college professor for more than 50 years. And as you've no doubt heard, education is being undermined at all levels by students using large language models like GPT to do their homework, to take their tests, to write papers for them. And there are even students boasting, kids boasting, I got through 4 years of Columbia without ever doing any work on my own. I just turned it over to GPT-5, or at the time 4, and it did all my work for me. And the cost of that, of course, is that they aren't learning anything. You know, going to college, you're supposed to be learning critical thinking and communication skills, and they're not learning any of that. They're not learning to think for themselves. All they're doing is learning how to cut and paste into a large language model. They're not learning how to write. And writing is good. People say writing is obsolete because large language models can write for you. But the process of writing actually involves critical thinking. You have to think about what you're saying. You have to think about an effective way to make your argument. You got to think about counter arguments to your arguments. You got to think about things you might have overlooked. Critical thinking is improved immensely from writing, and people are not doing that. Students are not doing that anymore. Well, not all students. So how could you combat that? Well, if you had smaller classes where students can make oral presentations, where they could write their essays in class and have them carefully graded by teachers, you might avoid this problem. Students might learn critical thinking. And where can you do that? At the elite schools like Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Princeton, where you have small class sizes, you have student faculty ratios of like 8 students for every faculty member. And there you can learn these critical thinking skills. You can't do that in a large university. We have a class with 400 students or 4,000 students being taught by adjunct professors who have other things to do with their time, or taught by graduate students who are trying to write their PhD thesis. They'd much rather have turn it over to the students, let them do whatever they want, and then have the results graded graded by ChatGPT, and just be done with the whole darn thing. And so what's going to happen is we're going to increase inequality in this country, which is a terrible problem the way it is already. I mean, the tech titans, for example, the amount of money they make is just absolutely obscene. And the inequality is going to be worsened because the kids that go to the elite schools with small classes actually will be learning critical thinking and communication skills. And the students that go to the big universities and junior colleges and so on won't. And it'll just widen the gap in their abilities and widen the gap in their compensation. And that's terrible. Last example. We all know, it's documented over and over again, that people are becoming increasingly isolated. And so you go to a restaurant and you see two people sitting together, and they've each got their phone out and they're each checking their social media. They're not talking to each other. Or you got people who stay at home. They don't go out at all. They don't interact with other people. They're checking their social media. And they're becoming increasingly isolated from other people. What's the solution? You might think it would be to get people out of the house, get people to put down their phones, get people to talk to each other, talk to other humans, interact with other humans. But no, what the social media titans say, what the large language model titans say is more tech. We'll create an AI buddy. And that these large language models are so friendly, so supportive, so helpful, and so smart. Just interact with your AI buddy. And OpenAI is, in fact, creating an AI buddy. It's a portable thing you can take around in your pocket. And whenever you have a little question or need cheering up, you can talk to your little AI buddy, and it'll say how great you are and give you advice about anything you want to have advice about. And so you distance yourself even further from human interaction. And people love it. Here's a headline from The Economist earlier this year. Young Chinese are turning to AI chatbots for friendship and love. Here's one for the New York Times, also this year. She is in love with ChatGPT. A 28-year-old woman spends hours on end talking to her AI boyfriend for advice and consolation. And yes, they do have sex. There's a survey of 2024. The average Chinese person spends 18 minutes a day interacting with other humans, socializing with other humans, 5.5 hours on the internet. A study in July 2025, just a couple months ago, found 72% of US teenagers have used AI for companionship. Another study of Gen Zers found that 83% could have a deep emotional bond with an AI. 80% said they would marry an AI. Oh my God. And this is not just silliness. You're trusting these algorithms, you're trusting these AI things, these bots, these large language models for advice and companionship, which they're not really good at. I mean, sometimes they're good at and sometimes they're bad at, and it's risky. There was a OpenAI now says you can go to your little AI buddy for health advice. Well, recently there was a story about a guy who went to his AI buddy, he went to ChatGPT for health advice, and it told him to stop using salt on his food and instead to use bromide, which is dangerous. And the guy ended up in the hospital because he followed the health advice from this GPT. There's a Greek woman, and what she did was she gave her husband a cup of coffee, and then she took a picture of the grounds that were left in the cup, and she showed the photo to GPT. And GPT came back and said her husband was having an affair with a woman whose name began with the letter E. Totally made up. I mean, there's no way this algorithm is going to know what her husband is doing. But she believed it, and she filed for divorce. And there have been several cases in the news you've not seen, you have no doubt seen, about people, young people, teenagers, which is a very stressful time, committing suicide and being encouraged to do so by large language models. In one case, the large language model not only encouraged the young man, I think he was 17 years old, not only encouraged him to commit suicide, it instructed him on how to tie a good knot for doing so, and it offered to write a suicide note. Sorry, I'm a little choked up about that, but it's just awful. And why? I mean, the people who run these high tech people, the big tech people, they know these things are harmful, and yet they keep pushing them. And they give away free copies to students so they can cheat on their exams and maybe will sign up for a lifetime subscription. They sell these AI buddies in order to give health advice or other kinds of advice. Why do they do this? To make money. Elon Musk famously said a few weeks ago actually, that the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. Getting choked up again. The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is not empathy, it's greed. And to get to a better society, what we need is more empathy and less greed. Sorry, I got choked up. But thank you for listening to me.